This leaders' discussion will cover how technology can be used responsibly and effectively to mitigate environmental challenges to create an impact in society. With an increasing focus on carbon neutrality, the world can look to digital to reduce emissions, monitor and optimize waste, as well as improve our capacity to act. The direct impact of tech progress has led to calls for e-waste management and a push for sustainable use of resources. Here, our leaders discuss the digital strategies which will help them achieve the net zero goal. The discussion features Damian, CIO Uniper, and Kelvin Wing, CIO EDF Energy, and is being moderated by Karthikeyan Natarajan, President and COO Cyient. Karthikeyan is responsible for global business operations, including sales, delivery, and business development. His focus areas include strengthening the service business, building strong solution capabilities with keen attention to digital transformation, and consolidating Cyient's design-led manufacturing expertise. Karthik, the stage is all yours. Over to you.
Thank you, Shreya, for the introduction. And I'm really excited to be part of this panel. This topic is very close to my heart. And thanks, Damian and Kelvin, to join me as part of this panel session. And hello, everyone. Welcome to this session on carbon neutrality and technology in climate change mitigation. My name is Karthik. I'm Chief Operating Officer and President at Cyient, and I'll be the moderator for this session. Climate change has been affecting global communities with extreme weather conditions like drought, heat waves, heavy rains, floods, and frequent landslides. The consequences of this rapidly changing climate have also been observed in the form of rising sea levels, ocean acidification, and loss of biodiversity. In order to limit the global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, a threshold which has been set up by the IPCC, is about carbon neutrality by mid-21st century is very much essential. Our perspective, we are working towards leveraging technology for mobility, health, energy, and sustainability. And carbon neutrality also implies a balance between emitting carbon and absorbing carbon from the atmosphere with carbon sinks. Carbon sink is any system that can absorb carbon more than what it emits. The major natural carbon sinks are soil, forest, and oceans. As per the estimates, the natural sinks eliminate between 9.5 to 11 gigatons carbon dioxide per year, while we generate close to 38 gigatons per year. So this is the gap that we are really trying to see how do we address, how do we leverage technology to address this. The companies that understand the triple bottom line, social, environment, and financial impact of greenhouse gas emissions have enough reason to work towards carbon neutrality. Here is the panel which is going to talk about the importance of decarbonization and digitalization coming together. I'm happy to welcome my co-panelists, Damian Bunyan, who's a CEO from Uniper, and Kelvin Wing, who's a CEO from EDF Energy, and have spent more than 35-40 years, and they don't mind being introduced as two Englishmen, one working for a German company and another one working for a French company. Welcome to this panel, Kelvin and Damian. So let me start off with Damian. Damian, I know you are a staunch believer in technology's role in bringing this gap between now and tomorrow when it comes to sustainability. Can you elaborate more on the role of technology in sustainability initiatives?
I think about it from an energy company's perspective. Two major challenges stick in my mind. First of all, clearly having a large number of power stations, we are an emitter of carbon dioxide. And right now, in different geographies, we can't exist without those energy sources. So what is it that we can do to have an impact on the efficiency of the production of energy such that we get the same amount of energy but produce less carbon dioxide? In the technology world, we'd call that predictive maintenance, or the use of the Internet of Things that would allow us to run the assets that we've got more efficiently. And even a 1% improvement in the performance of our assets has a significant effect on overall CO2. The second challenge that we've got is that the entire energy network is set up in such a way that you have the small number of very large power stations and then the rest of us distributed throughout our different geographies. And we're moving and changing that system significantly such that we no longer have these small number of large power stations, but have lots of distributed generation from wind, from solar, and from other sources. But the network isn't necessarily set up to take that. And we really run a risk at the moment of actually losing energy, sort of having blackouts, if you like, in the electricity space, if in this transition we don't manage the network where the demand is and where the supply is properly. And for that, you need technology. That is huge amounts of data being produced every minute of the day. And you really need machine learning capabilities to allow you to predict where will the demand be, such that you can plan in time to have that production. And if something breaks or fails, or is suddenly not available, to allow you to steer between those two things. So for me, the biggest two technological challenges are, how can I deploy technology so that I can run the old assets much more efficiently? And secondly, in this transition phase, how can we cope with this massive change such that we don't all suffer from repeated outages, which for society would be a disaster.
Sure, thanks, Damian. I think very interesting insights. So passing on to Kelvin, last time we spoke about interesting new technologies and how do you think you can really think about green tariffs, predictive maintenance, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence. What is your sense of these technologies helping to control the carbon footprint in the next decade?
I think they're really important. I think just building on what Damian has said, in the last 3 decades, half the CO2 added to the atmosphere has come. And interestingly, Mori did a poll in April of last year where 2 out of 3 Britons said see climate change as equivalently serious as the current COVID crisis. So we need to change, and I think we need to change a reasonable pace, but making life simple for people. What does it really mean to individuals in their day-to-day life to take step changes to avert, if we don't make that change, ultimately, disastrous consequences on the environment. So I see technology really becoming as easy as somebody trying to use, Spotify or the children going on, using all their computer games, etc. And I think it's absolutely the responsibility to make technology easy for people to use. And some of that ease is already going into people's homes globally, but here in the UK with smart metering. So smart metering, you can see how you can influence your CO2 emissions. I'm really delighted in what we're seeing, certainly in the EDF UK context, in making life easy to switch to electric vehicles. The government has said by 2025, 2030 that we'll no longer be building petrol and diesel engines. Therefore, we're looking to see how we can develop the infrastructure at pace to make it easy for someone to acquire an electric car, to use home charging, and then make it attractive from a cost point of view. Because I think most people will say, what does it really mean to me in the short term about what the cost of that will be? And I think that we have a responsibility to offer great services, but services that are affordable for people to make that change.
Interesting. And Kelvin, do you see that carbon net neutrality by 2050 is real?
I think it has to be. I think Marks and Spencer's in the UK a couple of years ago wrote a campaign, there is no plan B, and there isn't a plan B to do that. And I think it's our responsibility as individuals, corporate organisations supporting government, that we have to make that change today. we have to make those investments, and many of the partners that I work with in the IT arena all have their strategies of what that might mean. So, for example, we work very closely with many technical firms like Microsoft, etc. They've got their plans and what they need to do, and I think 2050 is too late. We're certainly looking at how we can help Britain achieve net zero by 2030. It's not easy. I think we have to educate people. We have to really make people understand that unless we make this change, then we are going to see more impact from the climate on how we live in this world.
Interesting, Kelvin. I think you said there is no plan B. I think we have to really make this happen, and very, very powerful and compelling point of view for us to really ponder on. So, I mean, coming back to you, and you talked about in the last conversation how your organization understands that there is a fundamental responsibility to do with something that helps to build a better society, and what should be the responsibility for corporates and enterprises in taking ownership for their carbon footprint.
I'd link that, if I may, to the last question you just asked Kelvin around 2050. I think if Kelvin and I, representing our organisation, was to say, you can't do it, we'd find very quickly that there's a new generation coming through that would make sure that we didn't get the chance to answer the question the second time. So I notice, I notice very much so in a European context, but actually when I'm in India talking to a lot of the people who supply me, there is a growing insistence from society that we have to do something. So for us as an organisation, in many ways, it's just like being an individual. You have to sit back and think, what can we do right now to simply use less energy? We can turn the heating down in the building by 1 degree, or the air conditioning we can alter. Teams or Zoom has shown all of us how efficiently and effectively you can work without moving even into the office. So not by staying in the office, by even not going into the office. So how much has that played a role? So what are the things that we can do as a company simply to reduce? The second thing we have to think about is, are there investments that we could make that would help us go further? Now, we might not find that there is a brilliant payback on that investment, but to what extent do we want to wait around for government subsidies before we do the right thing and make a choice? And the third thing we can do, which I think sometimes gets overlooked, is maybe we can use the energy that we think we need to use, we can use it a little bit differently. Kelvin just talked about electric vehicles. In my world, that's actually a battery with wheels. Most of the day they don't do anything. They're sat there connected to the grid. So can we use the infrastructure that we've got such that the renewables that could produce energy are able to be used? In Germany, there are large parts of the country that have so much renewable energy that you can't consume it. Well, how can we shift our demand around in order to cater for it? Because on a day like we have today here in the United Kingdom, the coal-fired power stations are going crazy because there's no wind and there's no sunshine. So let's think about how much we use, how we can invest to be smarter, and let's think about, can we use our energy in a slightly different way?
Interesting, Damian. And Kelvin, coming back to you, you talked about the importance of urgent need of curbing carbon emissions. What, according to you, are the top 2 tech-enabled strategies for companies to go carbon neutral?
I think building on what Damian said, is looking for the alternatives. In my world, within EDF UK, we closed our last coal-powered fire station, last year. I think it's making really brave decisions, and those economic decisions in the short time might be more expensive. They will be more expensive, but being really focused on the long-term strategies of those alternatives, battery, solar, nuclear, and I'm bound to say nuclear from an EDF UK's perspective, where that's a big driver to help the UK has achieved net zero. And then I think it's joining the dots of how the technology drives that, And Damian's spoken about, hasn't he, artificial intelligence, automation, and doing things differently. So for me, I think it's making that real strong connection between the pollutant of carbon and how technology and all that technology offers today to really hone down on data points and doing things differently. And some of those practical things of doing things differently, for example, automation in terms of some of our maintenance, where we used to send helicopters up to look at lines and etc., where now we're using drones. So I think we often talk about strategy, and strategy can be a really, really big word, and strategy can mean big plans. I think it's the simple strategy. We have to remove carbon, and it's the small initiatives and baby steps that we need to deliver to get the big wins.
Sure. Interesting, Kelvin. So Damian, coming back to you, what are the top challenges faced by the utilities in terms of reducing the carbon footprint? And do you see that it is adoption of technology roadmap, or is it more of a change management which has been causing the concern or challenges for them?
Oh, it's a little bit of all of those, I guess. First of all, we're a big polluter. Now, energy isn't bad. A world without energy would be a very difficult place for us all to navigate. And it may be the case when we built a lot of these power stations that nobody really had the understanding that we have now of the impact. So we're right in the middle of it, and we have to deal with it. That's a technical challenge. It then becomes a people issue, because you end up being seen as the bad guys. You have people protesting. I have my internet site being hit by denial of service attacks by environmental organizations that somehow want to protest. So you get pressure coming from a different perspective. Then, of course, there's the financial challenge. Simply saying, let's not bother, let's close one of these power stations. You may have invested in them 40 years ago and presumed that it would have a 40-year lifespan, and suddenly you don't want to do it. And then comes the challenge of government. Kelvin and I can think that we've got some great answers and great solutions, and they might be the case, but not every government in every jurisdiction wants to take the same path in the same time scale. A lot of the decisions that we think about electric vehicles somehow seem to be very dependent on financial incentives created by governments. But many governments have a life cycle of 4 to 5 years, and the kind of assets we're talking about have 10-year plus life cycles. So it's tricky. But what I do notice is in our organization is that in the moment when we realized and articulated to ourselves that we had to do something, the impact that had on our internal staff was really quite marked. Suddenly, there was a pride in being seen to be part of the energy transformation. And it even goes as far as, when I'm on a delivery floor in Bengaluru or in Hyderabad, and young people who don't have the same context of Europe talking to me about the new vision and asking how they can help, you see that something's happening. So it's happening. It can't be stopped. The only question with 2050 is why so long? And everybody's motivated to go for it.
Sure. Yeah. I hope people who are listening to this definitely start making far more commitments that it can definitely be pulled up from 2050. So Kelvin, coming back to you, I'm sure the change happens at the individual level as the corporates and enterprises can really start adopting this sustainability initiatives. And personally, what can we do as individuals to drive this change? And any specific one you want to quote, what changes did you make to yourself, which is something could inspire millions of the next generation which is looking at this session?
I guess I wear two hats. I wear the hat as a leader, and building on Damian, I think it's absolutely incumbent on us as leaders to talk about day in, day out what it means to achieve net zero. I also see, particularly from the next generation, how important that is to them about the future. So it's much more in my language as a leader, and I feel very proud as a leader that within the EDF UK context, we are about helping achieve Britain with net zero. For me, day to day, I would say 5 to 8 years ago, was I very good in terms of recycling? No, I was pretty appalling, but I'm pretty disciplined in recycling. I think I'm much more conscious, and I mentioned it earlier, when my car ends its current lease this year, I will go to an electric vehicle. There's no two ways about that. I will do that. And I think the other adage is, and many probably can relate, your parents telling you, you're shouting up the stairs to turn the lights off, etc. It's interesting that if you really do look at your smart metering, it's quite surprising what you are and can see real time what your CO2 emissions. So for me, I think it's three. I think it's in my corporate life, the leadership accountability, and really promoting and understanding why we are helping in everything that we do achieve net zero for the UK, and closer to home, much more discipline in recycling, and for sure this year it will be an electric car, and the power of technology rather than shouting at the kids to turn off heating and lights, etc. So that's my personal commitment.
Thanks, Kelvin. Damian, from your side?
Oh, I was smiling. I did same generation stuff. I have an electric vehicle. It's actually more fun. So it's a win-win situation. I love it. I then listened to Kelvin talking about leadership. I remember when I first started my career, I could tell who the leader was because they had their own named parking space near the front door of the building, and they had the biggest car that was parked in that parking space. And if that's the message you give out as a leader, you're telling everybody that's what you maybe want to aspire to. So I quite like cycling into the office, pulling my helmet off and saying hello to people as I cycle down the ramp into the underground car park. And I think people see those kind of things. And I'm a bit of a techie like Kelvin too. You don't need to shout upstairs anymore to have the lights turned off. I just do it with this.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much, Damian and Kelvin, for your fascinating stories, and how do you think all of us can contribute individually as well as part of a corporate to impact the society in a positive manner. So with that, I would probably come to the conclusion of this session. And I would like to just summarize, especially post-COVID crisis that we are dealing with. I think it has affected the lives and livelihoods worldwide. And we are marking 5th anniversary of the Paris Agreement, which is on climate change, and also adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals from UN. These two agendas definitely go hand in hand, and the decision that businesses will make will determine the course of the next 30 years and beyond. The emission must fall by half by 2030 and reach net zero by 2050 to reach the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal. Science is clear. If you fail to reach these targets, the disruption to economies and communities caused by COVID-19 may pale in comparison to what the climate crisis holds in store. It must therefore be a shared responsibility as businesses to redouble their efforts to recover from the economic and social crisis and get on track to achieve some of these sustainable goals. While the governments and consumers will probably drive more and will demand more from the enterprises and the corporates, and it is also important individually all of us take responsible decisions that would create a sustainable world that we can probably we cherished, and we want to give it back to the next generation. With that, really want to thank the fellow panelists for your time, and want to thank NASSCOM for providing an opportunity to be part of this panel session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Karthik, Damian, and Kelvin. That session's left me with more questions than answers, especially when it comes to our individual and collective responsibilities to ensure the continued sustainability for this planet of ours.